The Prudent Alliance for Responsible Species Development had never encountered a bigger headache than humanity. Quite literally, as it turned out, since their species had evolved past the unfortunate biological quirk of cranial pain responses several millennia ago. They willingly consume ethanol, declared High Counselor Vex Nil, their crystalline appendages trembling with such vigor that several junior analysts had to step back to avoid the sharp edges. Not just consume it, they celebrate it. They build entire cultures around it. They even age it, like some sort of toxic wine. The emergency session of the Alliance's High Council had been going on for what humans would consider 3 Earth days. The various assembled species, ranging from crystalline entities like Vex Nil to the gaseous cloud formations of the nebulons, had been reviewing the preliminary cultural assessment of Earth with increasing alarm. Commander Plix Teworth, a gelatinous cube of striking magenta hue with an impressive service record in xenological studies, oozed forward to address the council. "If I may, High Counselor, it gets worse. They have something called happy hour where they actually discount these poisons to encourage increased consumption. And don't get me started on their universities." A collective shudder rippled through the chamber, causing several Nebulon representatives to briefly dissipate and reform. The concept of deliberately encouraging the consumption of neurotoxins as a social lubricant was beyond comprehension to species that had spent millennia perfecting their biology to achieve maximum efficiency. "But surely," interjected Council Member Orb, "a perfectly spherical being of pure energy, they must be aware of the dangers. Their medical science, while primitive, has surely identified the harmful effects." Plix Teworth's gelatinous form rippled in what the other council members recognized as their equivalent of a sad head shake. "Oh, they're fully aware. They have entire medical terms for the after effects. They call it a hangover and have developed numerous folk remedies and modern treatments specifically to deal with the symptoms so they can do it all again the next day." The chamber erupted in chaos. The crystallines chimed in distress, the nebulons swirled in agitation, and several energy orbs had to power down to prevent overloading the chamber's containment fields. "Order. Order!" Vex Nil's voice resonated through the chamber, their crystalline form refracting light in the specific pattern that demanded attention. "We cannot allow this to continue. As the designated guardians of emerging spacefaring civilizations, we have a moral obligation to intervene before humanity poisons itself into extinction." "But how?" asked a junior analyst, immediately shrinking back as all attention turned to them. "Direct intervention is forbidden by the non-interference protocols of 47,392.6. Plix Teworth surged forward, their magenta coloring brightening with excitement. "What if we didn't have to directly intervene? What if we could save humanity from itself through, shall we say, subtle manipulation of their existing habits?" The commander's gelatinous form rippled with barely contained enthusiasm as they outlined their plan. It was brilliant in its simplicity: modify Earth's wine production to include a compound that would make the consumption of alcohol deeply unpleasant, but not dangerous for humans. They would simply help humanity's biology reject the toxins they so eagerly consumed. "I think of it as preventative medicine on a species-wide scale," Plix Teworth concluded, practically glowing with pride. The council deliberated for another Earth day before reaching their decision. The plan was approved, and Operation Save Humanity from Their Own Bad Decisions was officially launched. Commander Plix Teworth was appointed as mission leader, much to their gelatinous delight. As the council adjourned, none of them noticed the small note in the cultural appendix about something called moonshine or bothered to investigate why humans had so many different words for distilled spirits. After all, how much stronger than wine could human drinks possibly get? They were about to find out. Commander Plix Teworth had always prided themselves on their attention to detail. Their gelatinous form contained exactly the right ratio of minerals to maintain optimal viscosity, and their color-shifting abilities were precise down to the nanometer. This mission would be no different. "Status report on Operation Party Crash," they demanded, hovering over a holographic display of Earth's major wine-producing regions. Their current shade of magenta indicated peak efficiency mode. "Phase 1 is proceeding according to plan," Commander reported Lieutenant Zip, a binary intelligence housed in what humans would mistake for a floating disco ball. "Our nanobots have successfully infiltrated 98.7% of Earth's major vineyards. The modified grapes are developing exactly as designed." Meanwhile, completely unaware of the interstellar meddling in his industry, Jack Murphy was having what he considered a perfectly normal Tuesday morning, nursing a hangover with his own special cure, 2 shots of Kentucky bourbon and a splash of hot sauce. "Hair of the dog that bit you," he muttered to himself, adjusting his slightly crooked tie before heading to his office at Wine Enthusiast Weekly. At 45, Jack had built a reputation as one of the most respected and feared wine critics in the business, known for his uncanny ability to detect the slightest flaws in any vintage. What most people didn't know was that he'd developed this talent by regularly cleansing his palate with his grandfather's apple pie moonshine. Back in orbit, Plix Teaworth was reviewing the chemical composition of their enhancement formula for the 100th time. "And you're absolutely certain this will create the desired effect?" they asked Dr. Bloop, no relation to any prohibited names, their chief xenobiochemist. "Absolutely." Commander Dr. Bloop's tentacles waved enthusiastically as they pointed to various molecular diagrams. "When combined with ethanol, this compound will create an immediate sensitivity response in human physiology. Nothing dangerous, just deeply unpleasant. 1 sip, and they'll never want to touch alcohol again." "Excellent." Plix Teaworth rippled with satisfaction. "And there's no way they could have built up any tolerance to something like this." "Impossible," Dr. Bloop declared confidently. "The compound specifically targets certain neural pathways that no Earth beverage could possibly affect. We've analyzed everything in their wine production databases." What Dr. Bloop hadn't analyzed was Jack Murphy's garage, where 3 generations of Murphy family moonshine recipes were currently bubbling away in a still that would have made any revenue agent weep. The latest batch was something Jack called Apocalypse Now, a concoction that could strip paint and possibly achieve fusion at room temperature. As the Alliance's operation continued, Jack was selected to be the lead critic at an upcoming major wine tasting event in Napa Valley. The event would showcase the year's new vintages, all of them unknowingly enhanced by well-meaning alien nanobots. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," Plix Teaworth announced to their command staff. "When their most influential wine expert experiences the enhanced vintage, it will set off a chain reaction throughout their entire alcohol-consuming culture." Lieutenant Zip's disco ball housing spun thoughtfully. "Should we prepare a medical response team, just in case?" "Nonsense," Plix Teaworth declared, their color shifting to a confident fuchsia. "What's the worst that could happen? These humans can barely handle their simple fermented grape juice. Our enhancement will just give them a slight push toward a healthier lifestyle." Back on Earth, Jack Murphy was preparing for the event by sampling his latest batch of Apocalypse Now, a drink that technically violated several international weapons treaties. "Needs more kick," he mused, reaching for a jar of ghost peppers. The stage was set for what would become known in Alliance records as the Great Misunderstanding, and in human records as that time the wine got really interesting. The Napa Valley Wine Festival was, in Commander Plix Teaworth's professional opinion, a perfect target. Their surveillance team, disguised as what humans would assume were avant-garde art installations, watched as hundreds of wine enthusiasts gathered for the year's most prestigious tasting event. "Recording devices active," Lieutenant Zip reported, their disco ball form rotating slowly among the decorative lights, ready to document the humans' reaction to their enhanced beverages. Jack Murphy arrived fashionably late, having spent the morning calibrating his palate with a small batch of Apocalypse Now. His assistant, Maria Torres, followed close behind with an emergency flask of what she called Jack's medicine, a concoction that even Jack admitted might be illegal in several solar systems. "You know," Maria whispered, "I think some of those art pieces are watching us. Probably those tech startup folks trying to disrupt the wine industry again." Jack shrugged, straightening his lucky tasting bow tie. "Remember that AI sommelier that kept recommending motor oil as a perfect pairing for seafood?" Up in orbit, Plix Teaworth's gelatinous form quivered with anticipation as the first bottles were opened. Their enhancement should take effect immediately upon human consumption. They had positioned their best xenoanthropologists to document what they assumed would be humanity's first step toward a more responsible relationship with beverages. The head sommelier approached the podium, holding up the first bottle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we begin with a 2024 Cabernet Sauvignon featuring some unique characteristics our vintners are quite excited about." Jack accepted his glass, giving it the traditional swirl and sniff. Several disguised alien observers leaned forward, their various sensory appendages focused intently on his reaction. "Interesting," he mused, taking a substantial sip. The Alliance observers vibrated with excitement. There's definitely something different here. Notes of oak, blackberry and something almost metallic, with a kick like my uncle's garage hooch, but smoother. Plix Teaworth's color shifted to confused puce. This was not the reaction they had anticipated. Is anyone else finding these vintages unusually robust? Asked a fellow critic, already on his third glass. Robust, laughed an elderly winemaker. Reminds me of my college days. Remember when we used to drink that stuff that came in plastic jugs? As the tasting continued, the Alliance observers watched in horror as the humans not only failed to reject the enhanced wine, but began actively praising its intensity. The room grew increasingly lively, with several critics declaring this the most exciting development in wine since someone thought to let grapes rot in a barrel. Jack Murphy took the podium, his cheeks slightly flushed but his speech perfectly articulated. My friends, we are witnessing a revolution in viticulture. These wines have a complexity, a strength of character that I haven't experienced since my grandfather's special Christmas punch, the one that made Cousin Eddie think he could communicate with squirrels. The crowd laughed appreciatively, raising their glasses in toast after toast. Several Alliance observers had to be quietly removed after their disguises began malfunctioning from sheer stress. Emergency report to Command Lieutenant Zip transmitted. The humans are showing no adverse reactions to the enhancement. Repeat, no adverse reactions. They appear to be enjoying it. In orbit, Plix Teaworth's gelatinous form had condensed to half its normal size in shock. How is this possible? The compound should be making them intensely uncomfortable. Instead, they're comparing it to beverages they remember fondly. The situation reached its crisis point when Jack Murphy, now thoroughly enjoying himself, pulled out his emergency flask. You think this year's vintage is interesting? Wait until you try my personal blend. Dr. Bloop, monitoring from orbit, screamed in all 17 of their vocal appendages as their instruments registered the contents of Jack's flask. Commander, the human is consuming something that registers as industrial solvent. And, is that capsaicin? Who puts capsaicin in a drink? The tasting event concluded with an impromptu party that would have given the Alliance's Health and Safety Board collective apoplexy. Jack Murphy was declared a visionary for his appreciation of the new, more robust wines, and several vintners began quietly asking about his personal distilling techniques. As the humans celebrated below, Commander Plix Teaworth made a decisive color shift to emergency magenta. It was time to reassess everything they thought they knew about human biochemistry and perhaps pour themselves a stiff drink of nutrient solution. The emergency session of the Prudent Alliance made their previous meetings look like perfectly organized meditation retreats. Crystalline beings were vibrating at frequencies that threatened to shatter their forms, nebulons had condensed into stress-induced rain clouds, and at least 3 energy orbs had to be placed in containment fields to prevent them from going supernova. Commander Plix Teaworth, their gelatinous form now a sickly shade of chartreuse, faced the council. To summarize our findings, not only did the humans survive our enhanced wine, they rated it highly on something called vivino. But the compound Dr. Bloop's tentacles were tied in literal knots. It should have been unbearable. We designed it based on the strongest naturally occurring alcohol in their ecosystem. A junior researcher, a multi-dimensional being who manifested as a floating spreadsheet, nervously brought up a new holographic display. About that, we've been doing some deeper research into human drinking habits. It seems we may have slightly underestimated their tolerance. The display filled with images that made several council members wish they had fewer sensory organs, bottles labeled Everclear historical documents about something called bathtub gin, and most disturbingly, security footage from something called Spring Break 1999. They drink things that are 95% ethanol. Vex Nil's crystalline form developed several stress fractures. By choice. And then they light it on fire, the researcher added, pulling up another video that caused 3 nebulons to immediately evaporate in shock. Commander Plix Teaworth had become particularly fixated on one piece of data. What exactly is this moonshine we keep seeing references to? The presentation that followed caused the Alliance to institute their first ever mandatory mental health break. When they reconvened, Plix Teaworth had shifted to a previously undocumented shade of blue. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, they said, their gelatinous form rippling with each word. Humans not only drink ethanol for pleasure, they deliberately concentrate it to levels that would dissolve some of our species. And they do this in their garages. And prison toilets, added the researcher, causing another nebulon to spontaneously evaporate. But surely this must be a small, aberrant portion of their population, asked Council Member Orb hopefully. Lieutenant Zip's disco ball form spun up a new series of graphs. We've compiled cultural data from across their planet. It seems every human civilization independently developed some form of distilled spirit. The Russians have vodka, the Mexicans have tequila, the Scottish have scotch, the Koreans have soju. Enough vexed Nil's voice shattered several decorative crystals. The question is, what do we do now? In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Commander Plix Teaworth began to shift to a peculiar shade of purple that none of their colleagues had seen before. I believe I would like to try some of this vodka. The council chamber erupted in gasps, crystalline chimes, and one small antimatter explosion. For research purposes, of course, Plix Teaworth added quickly. We clearly need to understand this phenomenon better. Much better. Possibly through extensive personal investigation. Down on Earth, Jack Murphy was just finishing his morning ritual of 2 fingers of bourbon with a ghost pepper garnish when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a string of symbols that made his screen briefly display test patterns. Mr. Murphy said, a voice that seemed to be speaking through what might have been jello. I represent an international organization interested in your expertise with traditional spirits. Would you be willing to serve as a cultural consultant? Jack took another sip of his bourbon and smiled. Well, that depends. How do you feel about things that might technically qualify as rocket fuel? The response sounded like someone had dropped a bass into a hot tub, but it was decidedly enthusiastic. The hastily established interspecies beverage research facility looked suspiciously like Jack Murphy's garage, with the addition of several devices that appeared to be designed by Salvador Dali during a fever dream. Commander Plix Teaworth, who had insisted on leading this critical research mission personally, hovered near a row of mason jars with an air of both terror and fascination. And humans drink this? Willingly, they asked, their gelatinous form rippling as they scanned a jar of clear liquid that was slowly dissolving their scanning device. That's just the warm-up stuff, Jack grinned, patting his still affectionately. I call it training wheels, only about 160 proof. Lieutenant Zip, still maintaining their disco ball disguise, quickly converted the numbers. Commander, that's 80% ethanol. That's more concentrated than our spacecraft fuel. Oh, Honey Maria chimed in, carefully arranging shot glasses. Wait until he brings out the stuff he ages with Carolina Reapers. That one made my cousin speak in tongues. The first round of cultural exchange went about as well as you'd expect when introducing alcohol to species that had evolved past the need for digestive systems. The crystallines discovered they could absorb vodka, but doing so made them play what sounded like Russian folk music. The Nebulons found that tequila made them rain margarita mix. And poor council member Orb, after one sip of Jack's special bourbon, briefly became a binary star system. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Bloop, their tentacles now tied in what appeared to be a macram pattern, we should have started with something lighter. Like your beer. Jack and Maria exchanged glances. Well, Jack began diplomatically, we could show you some craft beer. There's this great imperial stout that's aged in bourbon barrels with coffee beans and... Imperial Commander Plix Teaworth's color shifted to what might have been panic. Your beer has a system of government. Oh, that's nothing, Maria laughed. Wait until they hear about Four Loko. The real crisis came during what Jack called the grand tour of human spirit engineering. He had carefully arranged samples from every major drinking culture on Earth, complete with traditional drinking customs. The Alliance observers watched in horror as he explained each one. This is absinthe, Jack said, holding up a green bottle. The French used to drink it until they saw through time. Had to ban it for a while. This is Polish spiritus, technically a crime in some countries. And this is something my Ukrainian grandmother called milk of amnesia. Commander Plix Teaworth, who had been cautiously sampling each drink by absorbing minute quantities into their gelatinous form, was now displaying colors that didn't exist in the visible spectrum. But, why? Well, Jack considered. Some folks say it's for the taste, others for the social aspects. My theory? Humans just really like finding out where our limits are, and then making moonshine there. The situation reached its peak when Jack introduced them to something he called a death in the afternoon, a cocktail invented by Ernest Hemingway that combined absinthe and champagne. 3 energy orbs had to be quickly shuttled back to their ship for emergency stabilization, and a nebulon briefly achieved consciousness on 17 different planes of existence. "I think," said Commander Plix T-Worth, their voice coming from what was now a tie-dye pattern of shifting colors. "We may need to revise our classification of humans as an emerging species. Any civilization that can routinely consume these substances and still achieve spaceflight capability clearly has unique qualities." Speaking of unique qualities, Jack grinned, reaching under his workbench. "Who wants to try my latest experiment? I call it the heat death of the universe. It's apocalypse, now aged in a barrel with ghost peppers, habaneros, and just a touch of weapons-grade plutonium." The resulting diplomatic incident would later be classified as that time we nearly started an interstellar war with hot sauce. 6 months after the failed attempt to save humanity from their drinking habits, the Galactic Senate witnessed something unprecedented: the opening of Murphy's Law, the first human-run bar in interstellar space. Jack Murphy stood behind a bar made from recycled spaceship parts, while Commander Plix T-Worth, now permanently shifted to a swirling pattern of party colors, served as official beverage safety consultant. "Remember," Jack addressed the nervous alien crowd, "everything here has been carefully calibrated for various species tolerance levels. We're not trying to dissolve anyone. Anymore." He glanced apologetically at a crystalline being who was still occasionally playing polka music after the vodka incident. The bar had quickly become the most popular spot in the Senate building, despite or perhaps because of the warning signs plastered everywhere. "Warning: human strength beverages served here." "No, really, we mean human strength. Please consult your species biochemical guidelines before ordering. We are not responsible for spontaneous evolution." Commander Plix T-Worth had become something of a legend in Alliance circles, known for their ability to absorb small quantities of vodka without immediately losing their form. They had even started a support group called Friends of Human Spirits, which mainly consisted of beings trying to understand how humans could possibly exist. "The thing is," Plix T-Worth explained to a group of fascinated newcomers, their color shifting between pleasant pastels, "we thought we were dealing with a primitive species because they willingly consumed poison. Turns out, we were dealing with a species so advanced they'd turned poison into an art form." The Alliance's official classification of Earth had been updated to include several new categories: unprecedented metabolic resilience, chemically creative, approach with caution, especially if they offer you something they made in their garage. Trade agreements now included a special beverage exchange clause, though most species opted to simply watch humans drink in horrified fascination. Earth's various spirits had become luxury items across the galaxy, marketed as extreme xenobiological experiences. Jack's grandmother's recipe for milk of amnesia was officially classified as a controlled substance in 12 star systems. His heat death of the universe was banned by the Geneva Convention and 3 interstellar peace treaties, both consistently sold out. Maria, now serving as chief xenotoxicology advisor, had developed a scale for introducing aliens to human drinks. It started with light beer and ended with something called Murphy's Last Stand, which carried the warning label "may cause transcendence of corporeal form." "You know what the funniest part is," Jack mused one evening, watching Commander Plix T-Worth attempt to teach a group of energy orbs how to do shots. "You all came here thinking you needed to save us from alcohol, and now half the galaxy is trying to figure out how we survived developing it in the first place." To be fair, Plix T-Worth rippled, their color a pleased magenta. "We had no idea you'd been preparing for first contact by pickling your species for the past few thousand years." The Galactic Senate eventually had to establish new protocols specifically for dealing with human beverages, including the legendary Murphy Protocol, which stated if a human says a drink is strong, assume it can melt standard ship hull plating. If a human says a drink is not that strong, evacuate the sector. And so, humanity's place in the galactic community was secured not through their technology, their art, or their achievements in space travel, but through their historic ability to look at deadly chemicals and think, "I bet I could drink that." As Jack liked to say, raising a glass of his latest creation, here's to humanity, the species that made the galaxy question everything they knew about survival of the fittest. Commander Plix T-Worth would usually respond with their new favorite human phrase, "I'll drink to that," though they still insisted on using a pipette. The story concluded, but rumors say that somewhere in the galaxy there's still a Nebulon cloud raining margaritas and occasionally playing Jimmy Buffett songs.